Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Imagine stepping outside tonight, just looking up to find the Big Dipper, and instead you see this blinking, moving grid of 50,000 artificial intelligence data centers completely blocking out the stars.
I mean, it's a stunning visual, right? And it sounds completely made up.
Yeah, but that is not a pitch for some dystopian sci-fi movie. That is an actual physical proposal that was filed this week with the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, right here in the United States.
It really highlights how fast things are moving. That proposal is just one single data point in a very, very long list of developments we're tracking right now.
Exactly. So welcome to the deep dive. Usually when we sit down to talk about the news or the state of the world, we assume a certain baseline of stability,
Right, like the laws of physics are locked in or human history is already written.
Right, and that the sky is just the sky.
Yeah.
But looking at the stack of global news reports, scientific journals, and these geopolitical dispatches crossing our desk this week, that baseline is just gone. Reality is in a state of massive, simultaneous flux.
It really is. We are seeing this unprecedented compression of time and technology. I mean, we have archaeologists unearthing 68,000-year-old art that completely redefines the evolution of the human mind.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's happening in the exact same week that tech companies are deploying autonomous AI agents to basically write our current history for us.
It's a lot to process. We're pushing the absolute limits of quantum mechanics to solve modern energy crises, while simultaneously fighting over these ancient terrestrial borders.
Right, so our mission today is to unpack all of this.
Exactly. We're going to explore the actual mechanics behind these headlines. We're not just going to tell you what's happening, we're going to look at the how and the why.
Because if you feel like the news is moving faster than the speed of physics right now, well, we're going to show you why that is quite literally true.
Yeah, literally true. So let's start by looking up. Before we deal with how humans are altering Earth, we really need to understand how the universe is reshaping itself right above our heads.
It's a very active environment up there.
It is. Let's talk about Comet C2025K1, also known as ATLS. The Hubble Space Telescope just watched this thing completely disintegrate as it approached the sun.
Yeah, this is a masterclass in cosmic thermodynamics. So comets are essentially ancient, dirty snowballs.
Right, just ice and rock.
Exactly. They're conglomerates of ice, dust, and rocky debris left over from the very formation of our solar system, which was roughly 4.6 billion years ago.
So they spent most of their lives way out in the deep freeze of the outer solar system, right?
Yeah, way out there. But as C2025K1 was pulled into the inner solar system, it encountered the intense thermal radiation of the sun.
So it just melts, like an ice cube on a hot sidewalk.
Well, it's actually much more violent than melting. In the near vacuum of space, the volatile ices within the comet, so things like water, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide, they don't melt into a liquid.
Oh, you do?
No, they sublimate. They transition directly from a solid ice into a gas.
It's skipping the liquid phase entirely.
Exactly. And this rapid phase change creates an immense sudden buildup of internal gas pressure inside the porous rock and ice structure of the comet.
So it's like a balloon filling up too fast.
Yeah, and what Hubble captured was the exact moment the comet's structural integrity just failed under that extreme thermal and internal pressure.
It literally blew itself apart from the inside out.
It did. It's an incredible thing to capture on camera.
That is incredible. It really is like a cosmic pressure cooker exploding. But that's a local comet, right? The astronomical community is also buzzing about open source data regarding a completely different comet called 3i.
Right, and the key difference here is that 3i is an interstellar traveler. It isn't from our solar system at all.
So how do we actually know that for sure? Does it have, like, a different chemical barcode?
That is a great way to put it, actually. First, we know it's interstellar because of its orbital trajectory. Local comets are gravitationally bound to our sun, so they travel in these elliptical orbits.
Like a big oval around the sun.
Exactly. But 3i is traveling on a hyperbolic trajectory.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning it's moving way too fast to be captured by our sun's gravity. It's just passing through our neighborhood.
Wow, okay, so what about that chemical barcode?
Right, so to read that, NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, they aggregated data from 3 different missions.
Okay, which ones?
The Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, or TESS, the Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution Mission, known as AVEN, and the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST.
So they pool the data from these three totally different instruments to get a complete picture. What did they actually find?
Well,
Let me push back on the implications of that for a second. If our solar system is constantly catching these interstellar snowballs, and they're full of organic chemistry, does that lend serious weight to the idea that the basic ingredients for life on Earth were imported?
you mean panspermia?
Yeah, that we're basically made of alien space dust.
You're touching on a hypothesis that is absolutely gaining more traction with discoveries exactly like this one.
Really?
Yeah. If complex organic molecules, amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, if they can survive deep space transit inside the icy shield of a comet, then it is entirely plausible that the early Earth was seeded with these materials.
Like during the late heavy bombardment billions of years ago.
Exactly. Tracking a comet like 3I-8 Tails helps us distinguish between the native ingredients of our own solar system and the chemical catalog of the wider Milky Way.
Speaking of the wider Milky Way, I was reading the reports on the Crab Nebula. It's located in the constellation Taurus, and Hubble has been doing this long-term surveillance on it.
Yes, and they just released a 25-year time-lapse of its expansion, which is phenomenal.
The Crab Nebula is the aftermath of a supernova, right? The explosive death of a massive star.
It is, but what's really amazing about this specific nebula is that the original explosion was actually observed and recorded by human astronomers on Earth nearly 1,000 years ago.
Wait, like Chinese and Islamic astronomers actually wrote down seeing this star explode a millennium ago.
In the year 1054, yes. It was so bright it was visible in the daytime sky for nearly a month.
That is wild.
And today, by comparing Hubble images taken in 1999 with new images taken recently, astronomers can visually track the outward shockwave of gas filaments.
So you can literally see the kinetic energy of the dead star just plowing into the interstellar medium at thousands of miles per second.
Exactly. It's literally a slow-motion video of stellar death.
So we have comets tearing themselves apart, stars exploding in slow motion. The universe is a very active construction site, just tearing down the old to build the new.
It's constant recycling on a cosmic scale.
Which leads directly to what the James Webb Space Telescope just found deep in the early universe. The astronomical journals are calling them little red dots.
Those little red dots are actually infant galaxies.
Infant galaxies, okay.
Yeah, because the universe is expanding, light from the dawn of time gets stretched out as it travels to us. It shifts into the infrared spectrum, which is a process called cosmological redshift.
And JWST is specifically designed to see this infrared light, right?
Exactly. So when it looks at these tiny red darts, it's actually looking back in time. It's seeing these galaxies as they existed just a few 100 million years after the Big Bang.
Wow. So we're witnessing the incredibly rapid assembly of early galactic structures.
Yes, and they are forming stars much faster than our current models ever predicted. It's forcing a rewrite of early cosmology.
And just to prove that we don't even fully know our own backyard yet, the reports show astronomers just discovered even more moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn.
Right. Our gas giants have such immense gravitational wells that they've been capturing passing asteroids and comets for billions of years.
We just couldn't see them before.
Yeah, but with better optics and computational algorithms to track these really faint moving objects against the glare of the planets, we are finding these tiny irregular moons. It fundamentally shifts our understanding of planetary mass accumulation.
All right, so the universe has always been a chaotic construction site. But here is where the narrative really shifts. Humans are now bringing our own heavy machinery into the mix.
Yes, we are moving from studying the stars to building infrastructure among them.
Let's go back to that hook from the beginning. Jeff Bezos' space company, Blue Origin, has filed with the SEC for Project Sunrise.
Yeah, Project Sunrise. It's a massive proposal to deploy a mega constellation of 51,600 satellites into low Earth orbit.
51,600. And their primary function isn't just internet communication like SpaceX's Starlink, right?
No, the primary goal is to create space-based data centers.
50,000 data centers in orbit. I mean, why on Earth, or I guess, why in space would we do that? It seems logistically impossible.
Well, to understand the why, we really have to look at the physical bottleneck of artificial intelligence here on the ground.
Because AI is maxing out our physical resources.
Exactly. Training and running advanced generative AI models requires an astronomical amount of computational power. Those massive servo farms generate incredible amounts of heat.
Right, and they need cooling.
Tons of it. On Earth, we are literally running out of physical real estate, power, grid capacity, and most importantly, millions of gallons of fresh water required to cool these servers.
Okay, so the logic is space is incredibly cold. Let's just put the servers there.
That's the idea.
But wait, space is a vacuum, right? Isn't a vacuum a perfect insulator? How do you cool a server if there is literally no air to blow the heat away?
That is a brilliant point, and it's the core engineering challenge here. You are right. You cannot use convective cooling, so fans blowing air in a vacuum.
So what do they do?
Space-based data centers have to rely entirely on radiative cooling. They must use these massive deployable radiator panels to bleed the heat away as infrared radiation directly into the deep chill of space.
And what about the delay? I mean, if I ask an AI a question and the server is literally in space, isn't there a massive lag?
You would think so, but counterintuitively, the latency in low Earth orbit can actually be lower than terrestrial fiber optics over long distances.
Wait, really? How?
Because light travels roughly 30% faster in the vacuum of space than it does bouncing through a glass fiber optic cable on Earth.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so routing data up to a satellite across the constellation in a vacuum and then back down can actually shave milliseconds off global financial trades or AI processing times.
Wow. So light actually has a speed limit in glass and space is the express lane.
Exactly. But as you can imagine, this is triggering a massive fight.
Oh, I bet. The astronomical community must be furious about this. Between Blue Origin's 50,000 satellites and SpaceX proposing up to 1 million AI-driven satellites and giant orbiting mirrors for solar power. I mean, what happens to the night sky?
Astronomers are warning of an existential threat to ground-based astronomy. These mega constellations reflect sunlight, creating bright streaks across telescope exposures. It's called the albedo effect.
So it just blinds the telescope.
Basically. Furthermore, the radio frequencies these satellites use to communicate bleed into the spectrums used by radio telescopes to listen to the distant universe.
So we're creating light pollution and noise pollution in orbit.
Exactly. We are facing a profound ethical and scientific conflict here. Do we privatize and industrialize low Earth orbit to fuel the commercial AI economy, or do we preserve the pristine night sky for fundamental scientific observation?
It's a huge trade-off. We're essentially trading our view of the Milky Way for faster ChatGPT responses.
That's one way to look at it, yeah.
And it isn't just commercial space getting crowded. It's a matter of national security.
Right.
The news reports highlight that the U.S. Space Force just had to abruptly shift a vital GPS global positioning systems satellite launch.
Right. They were slated to use a United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket.
But a glitch forced them to pivot to a SpaceX Falcon 9.
This is a highly revealing incident regarding supply chain vulnerability in modern defense. The GPS network is critical infrastructure.
Yeah, it guides everything from civilian commercial aviation to precision-guided military munitions, right?
Exactly. You cannot afford a gap in coverage. United Launch Alliance, or ULA, is a legacy defense contractor.
And SpaceX is obviously Elon Musk's commercial company.
Right. So the fact that a glitch in their Vulcan rocket forced the Pentagon to immediately rely on Elon Musk's commercial Falcon 9 underscores how deeply integrated private companies are into state security.
The military is heavily dependent on commercial agility to maintain its baseline operations now.
They absolutely are.
Okay, so tech companies are so desperate for computing power, they are trying to put servers in space. But to understand why our current physical computer chips are maxing out, we really have to look at the subatomic level.
We are hitting the absolute limits of classical physics.
Right, and quantum mechanics is basically tearing up the rule book. Let's look at the research published out of New York University. Scientists there have created something called time crystals using acoustic levitation.
This is where physics starts to sound a little bit like magic, honestly, but the mechanics are fascinating. Acoustic levitation uses intersecting sound waves to create a standing wave in midair.
Okay.
Within this wave, there are nodes of low acoustic pressure, and the researchers use these nodes to trap and levitate tiny microscopic beads.
So they basically have tiny beads floating in midair on a bed of sound. Where does the time crystal part come in?
Well, in a standard crystal, like a diamond, the atoms are arranged in a repeating pattern in space. In a time crystal, the structure repeats in time. What the NYU researchers observed was that these levitating beads began to oscillate and interact in a non-reciprocal manner.
Non-reciprocal. Meaning they don't give back what they get.
Exactly. In classical physics, Sir Isaac Newton's third law of motion states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction.
If bead A pushes on bead B should push back with the exact same force.
Right. But in this acoustic trap, the beads move in a continuous rhythmic cycle where the forces are completely unbalanced.
They appear to break Newton's third law.
Yeah, moving and communicating without expending internal energy.
Wait, if they are moving, energy has to come from somewhere, right? You can't just have a perpetual motion machine.
And you have hit on the exact mechanism there. They are not a true closed system. The energy driving this non-reciprocal movement is being continuously supplied by the sound waves themselves, the medium they are suspended in.
Oh, I see. So it's a non-equilibrium system.
The breakthrough is that researchers have figured out how to harness this environmental energy to create stable, repeating, non-reciprocal movement at the microscopic level.
It totally changes how we think about energy transfer. And speaking of breaking the laws of classical physics, let's look at the discovery out of the University of Konstanz in Germany.
Right. They found friction without contact.
Now, I am not a physicist, but friction is literally defined as the resistance that one surface or object encounters when moving over another. How can things rub together if they aren't touching?
Well, for over 300 years, since the laws of classical mechanics were formalized, physical contact was the prerequisite for friction. But at the quantum and nanoscale, magnetic forces take over.
Okay, so how do they do it?
The researchers at Konstanz created two atomically smooth magnetic layers and slid them past each other with a microscopic gap in between, so no physical touching.
Just a tiny gap.
Right. But as the magnetic domains in the top layer moved past the domains in the bottom layer, their magnetic fields became tangled.
Like trying to slide two strong magnets past each other?
Precisely. The magnetic fields stretch, they resist the movement, and eventually they snap into new alignments.
And that snap creates friction.
Yes. That snapping process dissipates kinetic energy as heat. It creates actual, measurable frictional drag across a physical gap.
That is wild. What is the practical application of that?
Well, if you can understand and control friction across a gap, you can design magnetic bearings for industrial machinery or wind turbines that experience zero physical wear and tear.
Wow, you eliminate mechanical degradation.
Exactly, which could save billions of dollars in maintenance and energy loss globally.
It is all about energy efficiency, which ties perfectly to this report from Australian scientists. They just unveiled the world's first prototype quantum battery.
Yes.
The articles say it uses a mechanism called superabsorption. Help me visualize this because it sounds intense.
Let's use an analogy. Think of a traditional lithium-ion battery, like a water bucket with a single hose filling it up. The bigger the bucket, the longer it takes to fill. That is the scale efficiency problem of classical batteries. A quantum battery doesn't work like that at all. It relies on a quantum phenomenon called constructive interference.
Constructive interference, like waves in a pool.
Exactly like waves in a pool. If two water waves crash into each other perfectly in sync, they combine to create one massive wave.
Okay, I can picture that.
Inside a quantum battery, the energy-absorbing molecules are placed in a state of quantum entanglement. When you shine light photons into the battery to charge it, the molecules don't absorb the light individually.
Because they're entangled.
Right. Because they're entangled, they act as a single collective system. The more molecules you add to the battery, the more their quantum states constructively interfere, creating a massive, highly efficient charging wave.
So unlike a lithium-ion battery, the larger you make a quantum battery, the faster it charges.
Yes. The charging speed increases non-linearly with the size of the battery. That is superabsorption.
If this can be scaled out of the laboratory, it completely solves the charging bottleneck for electric vehicles and massive grid-scale renewable energy storage.
Imagine an EV that charges faster the bigger its battery is.
Haha. It feels like we are unlocking cheat codes for the universe.
It really does.
But if you want a real mind bender, let's talk about the report from researchers in South Africa and China. They were analyzing entangled quantum light, and they found a hidden 48-dimensional topological structure.
48 dimensions.
48 dimensions. Humans operate in 3 spatial dimensions. Up, down, left, right, forward, back. What does it even mean for a beam of light to have 48 dimensions?
It's crucial to clarify that these are not spatial dimensions like the ones we move through. In quantum mechanics, a dimension refers to a degree of freedom.
A degree of freedom.
Yes, an independent property or variable that can be measured and manipulated.
Okay, so like color or brightness?
Similar, but much more complex. We are talking about properties like the photon's phase, its polarization, and its orbital angular momentum.
Orbital angular momentum.
Yeah, which is essentially the way the light wave twists like a corkscrew as it travels. By using advanced quantum optics, the researchers were able to entangle these photons, linking their states across space, and encode information into 48 different overlapping properties simultaneously.
So it is less like a 48-dimensional hypercube and more like a single guitar strung vibrating with 48 different distinct harmonic frequencies at the exact same time.
Yeah, it is a brilliant analogy. And the implication is staggering for data transmission.
I can imagine.
If you can control 48 dimensions of a single photon, the information density you can pack into a single beam of light is astronomical. It paves the way for ultra-secure quantum internet and incredibly powerful quantum computer protocols.
And researchers were already building the hardware to manipulate this light. Engineers at Harvard University just built a microchip capable of twisting and controlling light's chirality in real time.
Chirality is a concept of asymmetry. The classic example is your hands.
Like left and right-handedness.
Exactly. Your left and right hands are mirror images of each other, but you cannot superimpose them perfectly. One is left-handed, the other is right-handed. Molecules have chirality too.
And why does that matter for molecules?
In biology, this is a matter of life and death. A left-handed molecule might be a vital medicine, while its exact right-handed mirror image could be highly toxic.
Oh, wow. So how does a computer chip twist light to figure that out?
The Harvard engineers combined photonic pathways with microscopic mechanical structures. The chip actually physically deforms its own waveguides in real time to alter the polarization, the twist of the light passing through it.
So it's a shape-shifting chip.
Yes. By shining this dynamically twisting light onto complex molecules, they can instantly identify the molecule's chirality based on how the light scatters,
It acts like a highly advanced set of optical tweezers.
allowing for instantaneous chemical analysis for drug discovery or detecting biological threats.
So to summarize where we are building servers in space, breaking the physical laws of friction, and building computer chips that twist 48-dimensional light. Our hardware is evolving exponentially,
It is.
and that hardware is fueling the software, specifically artificial intelligence. We're entering an era where AI is shifting from a tool we use to an autonomous agent that acts on its own.
That is the pivotal transition. We are no longer just prompting a chatbot. We are deploying software that executes complex, multi-step goals independently.
Exactly. Let's look at WordPress, the platform that powers a massive chunk of the internet's websites. They just natively integrated AI agents that can autonomously research, write, and publish blog posts without human intervention.
From an economic standpoint, this drastically lowers the barrier to entry for content generation.
But from a cultural standpoint,
Right, it raises severe concerns about the dead internet theory.
which is the idea that the web will become completely saturated with machine-generated content, right?
Exactly. AI interacting with other AI, drowning out genuine human perspective and verified journalism.
And it isn't just writing blog posts. One of those fascinating news reports this week was about a man who successfully used ChatGPT to sell his physical home.
Yes, this was a wild story.
He didn't use a real estate agent at all. He had the AI analyze the local housing market, determine the optimal pricing strategy, write all the legal disclosures, and even suggest specific cosmetic upgrades to the house based on current buyer trends.
And the result?
It beat human real estate agent price estimates by $100,000, and he closed the sale in 5 days.
That is a stark demonstration of AI moving from the digital realm to orchestrating high-value physical transactions.
Right, in the real world.
Yeah, it is outperforming seasoned human expertise in highly regulated traditional markets. And the venture capital world sees the writing on the wall.
Definitely. The financial reports show that AI startups captured 41% of the total $128 billion in global venture capital funding last year.
41%. The capital is aggressively flowing toward total automation.
But with that much money moving that fast, the ethical and security guardrails are buckling. The tech journals this week are just full of scandals.
They are.
For example, the popular AI coding platform Cursor had to publicly admit that their new proprietary coding model was essentially just built on top of a competitor's model, Moonshot AI's Kimi.
It highlights the data cannibalism happening in the industry right now. Training these models is so expensive and requires so much data that companies are resorting to scraping each other's intellectual property.
And it gets even worse regarding cybersecurity. A compliance startup named Delve is currently accused of faking SOC 2 and ISO 27001 certifications to mislead its clients.
We need to explain why that is catastrophic.
Right.
SOC 2 and ISO 27001 are the absolute gold standards for data security compliance.
Right.
If a company has that certification, it means independent auditors have verified they securely handle sensitive data. If a startup is utilizing AI to fake these complex audit reports just to close enterprise deals, it introduces massive vulnerabilities into the global software supply chain.
An enterprise might hand over highly sensitive financial or medical data to a startup, falsely believing it is secure.
Exactly. The pressure to innovate is strongly incentivizing fraud.
Even in the arts. The Hachette Book Group just pulled a horror novel called Shy Girl right before publication.
Because they discovered the author likely used generative AI to write the manuscript, passing it off as original human art.
It's a crisis of authenticity across every single sector, code, security, and culture.
It really is.
So how are governments responding to this? Let's look at the political moves in the United States. President Donald Trump just signed an executive order regarding AI regulation, and it is incredibly sweeping. The order explicitly preempts and overrides state-level AI laws.
This is a massive assertion of federal power over technology policy. Over the last few years, individual U.S. states, most notably California, have been passing their own stringent AI safety regulations,
Creating a patchwork of different laws across the country.
Right.
And the Trump administration's stated goal with this executive order is to eliminate that patchwork, to prioritize national innovation, competition, and economic growth.
They are arguing that you cannot win a global AI race if domestic companies are bogged down by 50 different state regulations.
Right. Analyzing this objectively, it is a classic deregulatory strategy favored by right-leaning political spheres, heavily focused on maintaining geopolitical dominance.
The administration views AI development as a zero-sum race, primarily against China, which heavily funds state-backed AI research. The logic is that overregulation will stifle American dominance in this critical sector.
But to do that, the executive order actually shifts the burden of online child safety and algorithmic harm directly onto parents and consumers, stripping away those state-level consumer protections.
And that is the crux of the left-leaning and consumer advocacy critique. Critics argue that preempting state laws without replacing them with robust federal safety standards leaves vulnerable populations exposed to algorithmic bias, deepfakes, and data harvesting.
It's a fundamental philosophical debate. Do we prioritize rapid, unencumbered technological growth to secure national security? Or do we prioritize strict regulatory guardrails to protect citizens from the unintended consequences of that technology?
Well, regarding national security, the U.S. military has clearly made its choice.
They sure have. The Pentagon just officially announced it is adopting Palantir's Maven AI system as a core program of record.
To clarify military terminology, becoming a program of record means it is no longer an experiment or a pilot project.
It's permanent.
Yes, it is now a permanent, fully funded, integrated line item in the United States defense budget. Project Maven specifically utilizes AI computer vision to automatically analyze drone footage and satellite imagery,
Instantly identifying targets, vehicles, and troop movements faster than human analysts ever could.
Exactly. We are formally integrating autonomous target identification into the machinery of war.
And the battlefield is no longer just physical, it is heavily digital. The U.S. Justice Department just unsealed an indictment accusing the Iranian government of operating a hacktivist group called Handala.
This is a perfect example of modern asymmetric warfare. Handala presents itself online as an independent, pro-Palestine hacktivist collective.
But the U.S. Justice Department has traced their infrastructure and funding directly to the Iranian intelligence services.
State-sponsored hackers masquerading as independent activists to maintain plausible deniability.
And what do?
They executed a highly destructive wiper malware attack on Stryker, which is a massive U.S.-based medical technology company.
They didn't just steal data, right?
No, they deployed code designed to permanently erase and destroy the company's internal networks and manufacturing logistics.
Let's pause on that. They attacked a medical device manufacturer. This completely bridges the gap between digital code and physical human safety. If a hospital can't order pacemakers or surgical equipment because the manufacturer's network is wiped out by a foreign state, that is a physical casualty of a digital war.
Exactly. It proves that in the modern era, civilian infrastructure, healthcare logistics, and economic stability are the primary front lines of geopolitical conflict.
It is incredibly heavy. We're talking about cosmic explosions, AI overtaking human labor and cyber warfare hitting hospitals. Sometimes, to process the anxiety of the future, we have to look deep into the past.
We need to look at how humanity survived massive shifts before.
Right. And the archaeological journals this week have some profound discoveries. Let's travel to Muna Island in Indonesia. Archaeologists exploring a limestone cave there just found a handprint stencil made with red ochre pigment.
And the dating on this is revolutionary. Using advanced uranium series, dating on the calcite crust that formed over the pigment, they have securely dated this handprint to 67,800 years ago.
Wow.
It is definitively the oldest piece of representational art ever discovered on Earth.
68,000 years ago. I joked earlier that it is like a prehistoric social media post, an ancient way of saying I was here.
Yeah.
But neurologically, what does a handprint stencil actually tell us about the evolution of the human brain? Because it isn't just drawing a line with a stick.
No, it is a massive cognitive leap. Think about the process. To make a stencil, the artist had to place their physical hand against the wall, chew up the red ochre pigment, and spray it out of their mouth over their hand.
Right. And when they remove their hand, the art is the negative space left behind.
The art is what isn't there.
That's beautiful.
From a neuroevolutionary perspective, this demonstrates abstract objectification. The human brain had to conceive of the outline of an object as a separate, distinct entity from the physical object itself.
It shows a highly developed capacity for symbolic thought, self-awareness, and a desire to project identity across time.
And they were doing this tens of thousands of years earlier than our history books previously claimed.
They were leaving a permanent mark. And we see that desire for permanence later in history, too. In Egypt, archaeologists just unearthed a pristine necropolis from the Middle Kingdom period, roughly 3,000 years ago.
Yes, they found sarcophagi belonging to a group known as the Chantresses of Amun.
The Chantresses of Amun. Who were they?
They were a highly elite class of women within the ancient Egyptian religious hierarchy. During the Middle Kingdom, the cult of the deity Amun-Ra was incredibly powerful.
And these women served in the inner sanctuaries of the temples, right?
Performing sacred music and rituals, they acted as the direct intermediaries between the divine and the pharaoh.
History so often focuses on the male pharaohs and kings, but the sheer wealth, the intricate gold leafing, and the prominent placement of these sarcophagi prove that women wielded massive systemic power.
And influence in managing the spiritual and social cohesion of the empire.
And they maintained that cultural cohesion even during periods of intense political instability and famine. Which brings up the question of how humans handle scarcity and stress.
There is a fascinating genetic study out of the Uspallata Valley in Argentina regarding exactly that.
Researchers extracted ancient DNA from the remains of hunter-gatherers who lived there thousands of years ago.
The Uspallata Valley went through a period of severe, prolonged climate fluctuation. Extreme droughts devastated the local ecology, leading to massive demographic declines. It was an ancient climate crisis.
Right. And the standard historical assumption, the Hobbesian view of human nature, is that when resources disappear, humans default to brutal warfare. Scarcity breeds violence.
But the data from Argentina tells a completely different story, doesn't it?
It does. By combining the DNA analysis with isotopic analysis of their teeth and bones, researchers could determine exactly what they were eating and who they were interacting with.
The isotopes show that these distinct hunter-gatherer bands independently shifted their entire societal structure to adopt intensive maize farming. They shared the agricultural technology.
Furthermore, the skeletal remains completely lack the trauma markers like crushed skulls or embedded arrowheads that indicate endemic warfare.
So instead of fighting over the remaining scraps, they shared the new technology of farming.
The genetic diversity indicates they heavily expanded their kinship networks, intermarrying and sharing resources across different groups to ensure collective survival.
It is empirical proof that human resilience in the face of environmental collapse is often driven by profound cooperation, not conflict.
And we also see some wild evolutionary adaptations from the past. In the UK, paleontologists discovered a 200-million-year-old Triassic crocodile that ran on land like a greyhound.
Nature is incredibly adaptable.
It is a lesson we desperately need right now. Because if we look at the environmental reports crossing our desk, the Earth is entering a period of extreme physical stress. The United Nations World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, just released their 2025 climate report.
And the data is staggering. The Earth's heat trapping has hit an absolute record high.
The WMO confirms that last year, the global average temperature was roughly 1.43 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial baseline.
We are perilously close to the 1.5-degree threshold set by the Paris Agreement.
But the detail in this WMO report that really stopped me wasn't just the air temperature, it was the oceans. The report states that over 91% of the excess heat trapped by greenhouse gases is being absorbed and stored in the world's oceans.
This is a massive physics problem involving the specific heat capacity of water. Water is incredibly dense and has immense thermal inertia.
Meaning it takes a lot to heat it up, but once it is.
Exactly. It takes a colossal amount of energy to heat up the ocean, but once it absorbs that heat, it holds on to it. This means that even if humanity miraculously halted all carbon emissions globally today, the oceans will continue to radiate that trapped thermal energy back into the atmosphere,
Disrupting weather patterns and melting the polar ice shelves for thousands of years.
We have locked in millennia of warming.
And we are watching the macro systems break down in real time. Look at the Hindu Kush Himalayas. The reports state the glacier loss there is accelerating drastically, melting at double the rate it was just 2 decades ago.
The Hindu Kush is often referred to as the water tower of Asia.
Because it feeds the major rivers, right?
Yeah. Yes. Those glaciers feed the Ganges, the Indus, the Mekong. They provide drinking water and agricultural irrigation for over 2 billion people.
And as the white ice melts, it exposes dark rock underneath.
Which absorbs more sunlight, creating a devastating albedo feedback loop that accelerates the melting even further.
So we have the macro collapse, but we also have micro pollution raining down on us. Environmental scientists have confirmed that microplastics, tiny fragments of degraded plastic smaller than a sesame seed, are now being carried by atmospheric currents and are literally falling from the sky in rainfall.
They are acting as nucleation points for raindrops. Studies are finding heavy microplastic pollution covering pristine, remote forest canopies that are hundreds of miles from any urban center.
There's virtually no ecosystem left on Earth untouched by synthetic human polymers. It feels like the planet is a literal pressure cooker right now.
It does.
We have microplastics falling from the stratosphere and oceans holding millennia of heat. And look at the immediate destructive results in Hawaii this week. On the north shore of Oahu, over 5,500 people have been subjected to emergency evacuations.
The region has been battered by relentless, extreme heavy rains, causing flash flooding. The economic damages have already surpassed $1 billion.
But the critical danger right now is the infrastructure. Officials are warning that a 120-year-old earthen dam on the island is at risk of catastrophic structural failure due to the hydrostatic pressure from the floodwaters.
The dam in Hawaii is a microcosm of a global crisis. It represents the collision between modern, amplified climate extremes and aging human infrastructure.
We built our dams, our bridges, our coastal cities, and our storm drains for a 20th century climate that simply no longer exists.
And the physical legacy of the 20th century is coming back to haunt us in the oceans, too.
Right. Environmental agencies are tracking thousands of sunken World War II shipwrecks resting on the global ocean floor.
These are essentially ticking ecological time bombs. After 80 years of resting in salt water, the steel hulls of these sunken battleships and freighters are succumbing to galvanic corrosion.
They are rusting through. And what is inside them?
Millions of gallons of crude oil, heavy bunker fuel, and tons of unexploded, degrading chemical munitions.
As the structural integrity of these wrecks finally fails, marine biologists warn of catastrophic, localized releases of toxic materials into fragile coral reefs and deep-sea ecosystems. How do we even begin to clean up a mess that spans from microplastics in the clouds to WWII oil spills on the ocean floor?
It is overwhelming.
Even the geology of the Earth is more dynamic than we thought. Geologists just published findings from the Pilbara Craton in Western Australia, one of the oldest pieces of Earth's crust.
Yes.
They found paleomagnetic evidence proving that Earth's tectonic plates were already moving and subducting 3.5 billion years ago.
It reminds us that the planet has always been a churning, volatile engine of rock and magma. The difference now is that human activity has added an entirely new, accelerated layer of chemical and thermal volatility to the system.
And unfortunately, that physical and environmental pressure is currently being matched by extreme geopolitical pressure. The international news cycle is incredibly volatile right now.
We have to walk through this carefully because the global map is essentially a powder keg, and the rhetoric is escalating on all sides.
Let's start with the Middle East. The tension between the United States, Israel, and Iran is at a breaking point.
The posturing from state leaders is highly aggressive. This week, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei delivered his annual Nowruz, or Persian New Year, address to the nation.
In his speech, he defiantly declared that Iran's enemies have been defeated by the resilience of the Iranian people.
He is projecting strength despite the economic sanctions and the surrounding military conflict.
Exactly. He specifically urged the government and the populace to double down on what he calls a resistance economy, focusing on domestic production and self-reliance to immunize the nation against Western financial sanctions and pressure.
But outside of the rhetoric, the physical war is escalating rapidly. Israel has significantly expanded its military operations against Hezbollah forces in Lebanon, utilizing both heavy airstrikes and ground incursions.
The tactical shift is notable. Reports confirm that the Israeli military has systematically destroyed 5 of the 6 major bridges that link southern Lebanon to the rest of the country.
Explain the military logic there. Destroying civilian infrastructure like a bridge is a massive escalation.
In military doctrine, it is about severing logistics. By dropping those bridges, the IDF aims to cut off Hezbollah supply lines, preventing them from moving weapons, munitions, and reinforcements down to the southern front.
However, the downstream effect is that it completely isolates the civilian population, trapping them in a combat zone and severing access to humanitarian aid and medical supplies.
And the conflict isn't just staying in the Middle East. We are seeing proxy actions bleed into Europe. In the Czech Republic, a warehouse linked to Elbit Systems, which is a major Israeli defense contractor, was intentionally set on fire.
A previously unknown militant group calling itself the Earthquake Faction claimed responsibility for the arson. It represents the globalization of the conflict.
Militant groups are utilizing asymmetric warfare, striking at the supply chains and corporate interests of defense contractors operating thousands of miles away from the actual battlefield.
This level of instability immediately impacts the global economy, specifically the energy sector. We have to talk about the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz is arguably the most vulnerable and vital geopolitical choke point on the planet. It is a narrow waterway located between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman.
Roughly 20% of all global petroleum liquids consumed worldwide pass through that specific strait on oil tankers.
And with the threat of Iranian retaliation or missile strikes on shipping lanes, the insurance markets are panicking.
Precisely. If maritime insurance underwriters view the strait as an active war zone, premiums skyrocket, or they refuse to insure the tankers entirely.
If the ships can't get insurance, they don't sail.
The physical flow of global energy stops. The fear of this disruption is so high that Iraq just declared force majeure on several foreign-owned oil fields operating within its borders.
Force majeure, that is the legal clause that basically says an act of God or war has happened, and we are no longer legally bound to fulfill our corporate contracts, right?
Yes. Iraq is using it as a legal shield, anticipating that the regional violence will make it physically impossible to extract and export the oil they promised to international buyers.
And the global financial markets are reacting instantly to this supply threat. Goldman Sachs just issued a bulletin significantly raising its oil price forecasts, projecting Brent crude to jump by $8 a barrel and WTI crude by $7 a barrel.
Which means the price of gasoline for everyday people around the world is about to spike, driving up inflation.
And this is where the political maneuvers in the United States come into play. President Donald Trump is attempting to navigate this crisis using both military threats and macroeconomic levers.
The administration's actions this week showcase a dual-track strategy. First, on the military side, President Trump announced he has delayed a planned retaliatory military strike against Iranian power plants.
He stated the delay is for 5 days, citing that productive conversations are currently taking place behind the scenes.
He is keeping the kinetic military threat on the table, but pausing to see if diplomacy or back-channel pressure works. But the economic move he made is massive.
He signed an order lifting U.S. sanctions on 140 million barrels of Iranian oil that were previously stranded at sea, unable to be sold.
This is a textbook macroeconomic maneuver to control domestic inflation. By issuing a 30-day waiver and allowing those 140 million barrels of Iranian oil to flood the global market, the Trump administration is engineering a massive supply-side shock.
More supply means the price drops.
Exactly. The primary goal is to suppress the rising cost of global crude to keep domestic gas prices in the United States low.
It is a calculated risk, utilizing an economic lever that temporarily enriches an adversary in order to stabilize the American economy and appease domestic consumers.
It is absolute game theory. At the same time, Trump is also publicly criticizing NATO allies, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
He made headlines calling certain European allies cowards for allegedly lacking support for the U.S. and Israeli posture against Iran.
While the public rhetoric against NATO is highly abrasive, the actual on-the-ground military cooperation tells a slightly different story. For example, despite domestic public opposition, the UK government, under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, has authorized the United States military to utilize British sovereign bases like those in Cyprus to launch defensive strikes against Iranian missile batteries that are threatening ships in the Strait of Hormuz.
So behind the scenes, the military alliances are still executing joint operations based on collective maritime defense. How are the other global superpowers reacting to this chess match?
China is officially stepping in with diplomatic warnings. The Chinese Foreign Ministry issued a strong statement urging both the United States and Israel to immediately halt military actions.
Warning that the escalating retaliations are creating a vicious cycle that threatens the entire global economic architecture.
China relies heavily on Middle Eastern oil, so regional stability is paramount to their own domestic manufacturing.
And while all eyes are on the Middle East and Asia, there is a massive geopolitical tremor happening in South America. U.S. federal prosecutors have reportedly opened an investigation into the current president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro.
The allegations suggest potential financial ties between Petro's political campaigns and major Colombian drug cartels.
President Petro has vehemently and publicly denied these accusations, calling them a coordinated political smear campaign to destabilize his government.
But the mere existence of a U.S. federal probe into a sitting Latin American head of state creates immense diplomatic friction and regional instability.
Let's pull all of this together. We are seeing physical bridge bombings in Lebanon, cyber attacks on medical device companies, and economic maneuvers with millions of barrels of oil all happening in the same week.
It's all connected.
Is this the new reality of omni-warfare, where the battlefield is everywhere all at once?
Yes. The traditional boundaries of war have evaporated. Nations and non-state actors are seamlessly utilizing economic sanctions, cyber sabotage, proxy militias, and narrative manipulation right alongside traditional kinetic missiles. It is a fully integrated, multi-domain ecosystem of conflict.
With the heavy weight of all of this, the wars, the climate crisis, the AI takeover, it is vital to bring the focus back to the human scale. Our health, our culture, and the people we remember.
Because at the end of the day, we are just biological creatures trying to live our lives.
Let's look at human health, where we are seeing incredible vulnerabilities, but also stunning scientific innovation. On the innovation side, the medical journals are reporting a massive breakthrough in synthetic biology.
Scientists have successfully engineered probiotic bacteria into autonomous, tumor-hunting cancer killers.
It is a phenomenal application of genetic engineering. Researchers took standard, safe probiotic bacteria, the kind you might find in yogurt, and altered their genetic code.
They programmed the bacteria with complex biological logic gates,
essentially telling them to search the human body for environments with extremely low oxygen levels and high acidity, because those are the specific environmental conditions found inside a dense growing tumor.
Exactly. The engineered bacteria act like microscopic bloodhounds. They navigate the bloodstream, locate the hypoxic core of the tumor, and once they verify the environment, they trigger a payload mechanism,
releasing highly targeted therapeutic drugs directly into the cancer cells without damaging the surrounding healthy tissue.
It is literally a microscopic special ops team programmed to hunt and destroy cancer.
And we are also learning how to control our own neurology better. Researchers just mapped a specific trigger pathway in the brainstem that directly controls high blood pressure.
They identified the precise neural circuit of the baroflex pathway. By understanding exactly how the brainstem signals the blood vessels to constrict, medical science can develop highly specific neuromodulating drugs to treat chronic hypertension,
a condition that drives heart disease and strokes in billions of people worldwide. It is amazing what we can cure. But the reports also highlight how badly we are poisoning ourselves. There are new, alarming studies regarding PFAS, per, and polyfluoroalkyl substances.
We commonly call them forever chemicals because their carbon-fluorine bonds are so strong they virtually never break down in nature. We use PFAS in everything: non-stick frying pans, waterproof rain jackets, stain-resistant carpets, and fast food wrappers.
Because they don't degrade, they bioaccumulate in the environment and in our bodies. And the new study shows they are specifically targeting bone density in children.
Yes. The research demonstrates that early childhood exposure to certain levels of PFAS permanently disrupts the function of osteoblasts, the cells responsible for building new bone tissue.
It permanently weakens children's skeletal structures, making them more prone to fractures and early-onset osteoporosis later in life.
It is a stark reminder of the hidden biological costs of industrial convenience.
And speaking of public health, I saw a mass warning issued by health organizations this week. Millions of Americans are being officially advised to skip heavy, greasy meals and limit their caffeine intake this entire weekend. Why are doctors telling us to skip our morning coffee?
It is a fascinating intersection of biology and sociology. Health agencies are tracking incredibly high levels of aggregate societal stress and anxiety right now.
Likely driven by the relentless heavy news cycles we've just spent an hour discussing.
Exactly. When the human body is chronically stressed, the nervous system is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, the fight-or-flight response.
Consuming excessive caffeine artificially stimulates that exact same sympathetic nervous system pathway, amplifying the anxiety and leading to heart palpitations and sleep disruption.
And heavy, high-fat meals divert massive amounts of blood flow to the digestive tract, physically taxing an already exhausted system.
The advisory is essentially a public health intervention, urging a collective physiological rest to help the population manage the psychological weight of current events.
A nationwide prescription to just take a breath.
We'll also have an update on a localized health crisis. The UK Health Security Agency, the UKHSA, announced that a severe meningitis outbreak in Kent has finally passed its peak.
Meningitis is terrifying because of its speed. The bacterial infection inflames the protective membranes surrounding the brain and spinal cord, and it can become fatal within hours.
The coverage of the outbreak highlighted a powerful survival story from a university student named Annabelle Mackay.
Annabelle's story is crucial for public awareness. She contracted the bacteria and went from feeling slightly fatigued to experiencing organ failure in less than 24 hours.
Her survival was purely dependent on rapid symptom recognition, the sudden fever and the characteristic rash that doesn't fade under pressure.
Her subsequent public advocacy is a testament to human resilience and the vital importance of community health education.
Sadly, the fragility of human life was also front-page news regarding a tragic accident in New York. At LaGuardia Airport, an Air Canada Express passenger jet collided with an airport fire truck directly on the active runway.
The reports confirm that both pilots aboard the aircraft were killed.
It is a devastating tragedy that exposes the intense vulnerabilities in runway safety protocols. Accidents like this highlight the complex human factors engineering required to manage crowded ground operations.
Where a momentary breakdown in communication between air traffic control, emergency vehicles, and flight crews can lead to catastrophic kinetic collisions.
And as we reflect on human lives, we must acknowledge the loss of several major cultural and historical figures this week. Chuck Norris passed away at the age of 86.
Chuck Norris is a fascinating figure because he essentially lived two distinct cultural lives. To the younger digital generation, he is the immortal subject of viral internet memes exaggerating his toughness.
But historically, he leaves a profound legacy as a genuine pioneer of martial arts in the West. He brought Tang Soo Do to America, fought legendary bouts with Bruce Lee in cinema, and through Walker, Texas Ranger, defined an entire era of American television masculinity.
We also saw the passing of Robert Mueller at the age of 81. He was the former director of the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Mueller was a towering figure in American jurisprudence. He fundamentally reshaped the FBI into a premier counterterrorism agency in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th attacks.
And of course, he will be historically remembered for leading the incredibly high-profile special counsel investigation into the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
Two very different men, both leaving indelible marks on the cultural and political fabric of the country. And finally, a pop culture note that perfectly encapsulates the collision of our human culture with the rapidly advancing AI era we discussed earlier. Luke Littler, the teenage darts prodigy from the UK, has officially filed legal paperwork to trademark his own face.
Let the absurdity of that sink in. As generative AI image models become completely flawless, malicious actors are creating hyper-realistic, unauthorized images of his likeness to sell counterfeit merchandise and secure fake endorsements.
Because the technology has outpaced existing legislation, a teenager is being forced to utilize intellectual property law, trademarking the physical geometry of his own biological face just to maintain legal ownership over his identity.
We can genetically program bacteria with logic gates to hunt tumors, but a human being has to file paperwork with the government to prove he owns his own face.
We are living in a truly bizarre, contradictory timeline. So what does this all mean? Let's recap the incredible journey of this deep dive. We started by looking up, unpacking the thermodynamics of Comet C2025K1 exploding under the sun's heat, and understanding how James Webb spots baby galaxies through the infrared redshift.
We explored the physics of cooling 50,000 AI data centers in the vacuum of low Earth orbit and the profound conflict that creates with astronomers trying to save the natural night sky.
We dove into the subatomic realm, explaining how acoustic levitation breaks classical laws of motion, and how quantum batteries use constructive interference to charge faster as they grow.
We analyzed the staggering reality of 48-dimensional quantum light. We tracked the aggressive economic rise of autonomous AI, from writing blogs to executing physical real estate transactions, and objectively analyzed the fierce geopolitical debate over whether to deregulate that technology for national supremacy or restrict it for consumer safety.
We looked at the immense physical pressure on our planet. Oceans absorbing millennia of thermal heat, the mechanics of microplastic rain, and the galvanic corrosion of WWII shipwrecks threatening our oceans. And we navigated the incredibly volatile landscape of modern omni-warfare, where economic sanctions, cyber-sabotage, and kinetic missile strikes are inextricably linked.
It is exactly what we said at the beginning. The fundamental architecture of our reality is being rewritten live right in front of us.
If we pull back and look at the absolute largest picture, I want to leave you with this final thought. Today we explore the lives of the chantresses of Amun in Egypt 3,000 years ago, and the minds of the artists who blew red ochre over their hands in an Indonesian cave 68,000 years ago.
Those ancient humans lived through extreme, brutal climate shifts, disease, and the collapse of their societies. Yet, what did they leave behind? They didn't just leave weapons, they left behind art, complex religious devotion, and as the genetic data from the Argentine hunter-gatherers proved, they left behind a legacy of profound, adaptive human cooperation in the face of scarcity.
They chose community over conflict to survive the climate crisis.
Precisely. As we face the rise of autonomous superintelligence, record-breaking global heat, and incredibly complex multi-domain wars, the question isn't just whether our advanced hardware will survive. The vital question is, what kind of enduring human mark are we going to leave on the cave wall of the 21st century?
Wow, are we going to leave behind a rusted WWII shipwreck leaking oil? Or are we going to leave behind a handprint of cooperation? You know, we started this whole conversation by saying it feels like reality is moving faster than the speed of physics. But maybe, just like those ancient hunter-gatherers in Argentina, our best tool to survive that chaotic speed isn't just building better AI or faster quantum batteries. Maybe our best survival tool is just each other. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the forces shaping our world today. Stay curious, question everything, and keep exploring the incredible, complex, and beautiful world around you.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. So this week, the entire planetary economy was basically held hostage by a 21-mile strip of water.
Yeah, the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly, the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, we are witnessing an unprecedented escalation in this military and economic standoff between the U.S.-Israel coalition and Iran. And, the ripple effects are just tearing through global financial markets right now.
Right, and it's shifting geopolitical alliances across the whole planet, really.
It is. Which brings us to our central question today, emerging directly from this crisis. Are aggressive military ultimatums and, economic brinksmanship a necessary, effective mechanism for securing global trade routes and forcing diplomatic resolutions?
Or, and this is the crux of it, do they fundamentally fracture the global economy? Like, are we permanently alienating the global south and accelerating the decline of Western hegemony?
Right. So I will state my position clearly right at the top. I firmly believe that assertive military deterrence, even when it triggers, acute short-term market volatility, is a vital tool. It's essential for securing planetary energy choke points.
I see where you're coming from, but I come at it from a completely different way.
Well, let me just finish the thought. Projecting credible strength is, historically speaking, the only proven method to force rogue actors to the negotiating table. That's how you ultimately stabilize the global order.
And I respect that perspective, but I look at the exact same events and see just a disastrous miscalculation. I mean, this strategy of brinksmanship is actively starving developing economies of energy.
Starving is a strong word, don't you think?
But it's accurate. We are risking a 1970s-style global energy crisis here. And worse, it's driving the global south directly into the arms of alternative coalitions led by China and Russia. It accelerates a multipolar world order by proving that the West is simply too volatile to trust.
Okay, well, we need to unpack the actual mechanics of deterrence here. Because what we've seen over the past few days is it's a textbook example of how game theory operates in modern geopolitics.
In theory, right? But the stakes are real people.
Of course, but look at the actions. Former President Donald Trump issued a strict 48-hour ultimatum to Iran to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. And deterrence only works if the threat is credible, right? And asymmetrical.
Sure, but it wasn't just rhetoric this time.
Exactly. It was apt by immediate, unified allied action. I mean, the UK formally allowed U.S. forces to use British bases to strike Iranian missile sites targeting the Strait. And look at what happened next.
The markets went completely crazy for one.
But that overwhelming, coordinated pressure forced a 5-day pause in strikes due to quote-unquote productive talks. The market's response was actually instantaneous in a good way. The Dow jumped 800 points at the open.
Wow. Wait, you're pointing to an 800-point bounce as a victory?
I'm saying the mechanism is clear. You force a diplomatic breakthrough by making the cost of aggression unimaginably high. Just recently, Iran's supreme leader declared in a Nowruz message that the nation's enemies were defeated.
Yeah, Al Jazeera covered that address extensively.
Right. So when dealing with an adversary operating under that level of ideological defiance, someone willing to hold the global economy hostage, quiet diplomacy fails. Peace is achieved exclusively through overwhelming resolve.
Wait, but look at the timeline here. You are entirely ignoring the structural, systemic damage that preceded that market bounce. I mean, the global supply chain isn't some massive shock absorber that just bounces back.
It adjusts to risk, though. That's what markets do.
It is a tight, interlocking gear system. When you throw a geopolitical wrench into the Strait of Hormuz, you aren't just pausing the machine, you are stripping the gears in manufacturing hubs thousands of miles away.
I mean, temporary disruptions are priced in.
But this strategy of brinkmanship created a severe market whiplash. It pushed both the Dow and the Nasdaq deep into correction territory. We saw CNBC reporting 4 straight weeks of devastating compounding losses.
And then it rebounded.
Only after the panic was so profound that it wiped out the year-to-date gains in gold and silver. It literally vaporized $2 trillion in the metals market. But more importantly, the real cost isn't being paid by Wall Street traders.
Who is paying it then?
The rest of the planet. Look at India. Because of the immediate disruption to energy supplies and the spiking cost of crude, northern India is facing severe, real-time inflation in food, water, and fuel.
I acknowledge the inflation issue in developing nations, absolutely.
So when you weaponize the global supply chain, the collateral damage falls immediately on the world's most vulnerable populations. It proves weaponizing global trade is an unsustainable diplomatic strategy.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Isn't this severe market volatility simply the economic equivalent of a fever breaking?
A fever breaking?
Yeah, like an acute pain required to eradicate a chronic infection of instability in the Middle East. You're pointing to the market volatility as a sign of policy failure, but market fluctuations are the exact mechanism by which global risk is priced in and eventually neutralized.
I have to strongly disagree with that analogy.
Let me just explain why the rally matters, though. Financial markets understand that a temporary disruption, however severe, is infinitely preferable to a permanent closure of the world's most vital energy artery. The market prices in the terror and then violently prices in the relief.
I have to push back on that because you are assuming the market was rationally pricing in risk. It wasn't. It was suffering a systemic panic attack.
Panic is just rapid risk reassessment.
No, we need to look at exactly why gold and silver crashed alongside equities. Historically, precious metals are the ultimate safe haven during war. If the market is rationally pricing in geopolitical conflict, gold should skyrocket, right?
Usually, yes.
The fact that it crashed indicates a severe liquidity crunch. Institutional investors were forced to sell off everything.
Right. To cover their leveraged positions. Margin calls.
Exactly. When the equities market started to free fall, brokers issued massive margin calls. To get cash, investors dumped thousands of tons of gold and silver onto the market. That is not a healthy market pricing in risk.
Well, it's a financial system absorbing a shock.
It's a system cracking under the pressure. And if you are listening right now and wondering why a conflict 7,000 miles away is eating your tax refund, it's because of the macroeconomic reality of crude oil.
A temporary spike at the pump is better than a closed strait.
But a temporary stock bounce does not refill the wallets of consumers paying exorbitant gas prices. You simply cannot manage global diplomacy through roller coaster economics. A fever that spikes too high doesn't just break the infection, it kills the patient.
Let's talk about the physical vulnerability of the strait then, because that geographic reality dictates the policy. We're talking about a channel barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point.
Yeah, it's incredibly narrow.
Yet, it is the transit corridor for roughly 20% of the world's global oil consumption, plus a massive portion of its liquefied natural gas. When Iranian officials explicitly threaten to close the strait to enemy-linked ships, they are threatening to sever the jugular vein of the planetary economy.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that militarizing a choke point actually creates the disruption it's meant to prevent?
Ensuring it remains open requires a forward-deployed, credible military perimeter. Without the threat of overwhelming retaliation, the mere idea of closure becomes a permanent tax on global shipping.
But we need to understand how a strait is effectively closed in the modern world. You don't even need to fire a single missile or sink a tanker. All you have to do is raise the threat level high enough.
By Iranian actions, not ours.
By U.S. ultimatums, too. When the U.S. floods the Persian Gulf with aircraft carriers, the Joint War Committee at Lloyd's of London takes notice. They designate the transit corridor as a high-risk war zone.
Which is a mathematical response to risk.
Instantly, hull insurance and cargo premiums skyrocket. The actuarial tables close the strait before a single shot is fired. And Fatih Birol, the chief of the International Energy Agency, explicitly warned this standoff risks triggering the worst global energy crisis in decades.
Right, he drew a parallel to the twin oil shocks of the 1970s. I read that report.
Exactly. We aren't securing the strait. We are turning it into a massive tripwire. And look at the regional players. The Gulf states themselves, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they are actively avoiding direct war with Iran right now.
Because they recognize the physical vulnerability of their own infrastructure.
Right. Their desalination plants and massive refineries are in the crosshairs. If the nations physically located on the strait believe that military escalation is too dangerous, why does the West insist it is the only solution?
Because the Gulf states have the luxury of caution precisely because the U.S.-Israel coalition provides the overarching security umbrella. They can afford to play the diplomat because someone else is carrying the big stick.
I think that's a very Western-centric view of their diplomacy.
But regarding the IEA's warning and the 1970s oil shocks, the mechanics today are different. The U.S. is a massive energy producer now, and nations hold strategic petroleum reserves specifically to act as buffers.
Being a massive producer doesn't insulate the American consumer, though.
It softens the blow. The credible threat of force changes the calculus in Tehran. Deterrence forces them to realize that attempting to mine the waters will result in the destruction of their own domestic power grid. It's the fear of asymmetrical retaliation that keeps the oil flowing.
You mentioned the U.S. is a massive energy producer, which is true. But oil is a fungible global commodity. It doesn't matter if we pump record amounts in Texas. When 20% of global supply is threatened at Hormuz, the global price goes up.
Well, yes, global markets dictate the price.
Which is exactly why American consumers are still bleeding at the pump. And your reliance on deterrence theory assumes both sides share the same breaking point. They don't.
You don't think Iran feels the pressure of sanctions?
They do. But they operate on an ideological calculus where resisting Western pressure is an existential imperative. But I want to pivot here, because this localized crisis is triggering a much larger planetary shift.
You mean the global south?
Yes, the astronomical shipping costs and energy starvation we just talked about, that is exactly what is driving the global south to pivot away from the West entirely. They are actively seeking alternatives to U.S. hegemony because of this crisis.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, to be honest. Aren't they just desperately trading one hegemon for another out of economic panic?
They are looking at the math and concluding that the US dollar and US military dominance are now liabilities, not assets. Just look at the rhetoric. Brazil's President Lula openly accused the US of wanting to, quote, colonize us again.
He was referring to financial sanctions, right?
Yes, the extraterritorial nature of Western sanctions. Washington can effectively turn off a developing nation's economy if they don't comply. And John Mearsheimer recently stated that India must realize getting too close to the US right now is like standing next to a rogue elephant.
Mearsheimer also named Russia the clearest winner in this conflict, which is telling.
Because Russia benefits from elevated oil prices while the West is distracted. And RT has been broadcasting this shift nonstop. Meanwhile, China is capitalizing diplomatically and economically.
By doing what exactly?
They are removing tariffs on African nations. They are urging the UN to establish a campus in Beijing. And we are seeing the actual mechanisms of financial decoupling accelerate. Nations are bypassing the SWIFT banking system.
Oh, you mean moving towards SIPs and BRICS pay.
Exactly. India and Russia are settling massive energy trades in local currencies. This isn't just political posturing. It is the mechanical unhooking of the global financial plumbing.
Okay, but I have to challenge that narrative because it fundamentally misreads China's economic vulnerability. Yes, alternative payment systems exist, but China's own export power is deeply threatened by fractured supply chains.
They have domestic challenges, sure.
Huge challenges. According to the South China Morning Post, China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, and a massive portion comes right through the Strait of Hormuz. Doesn't China's warning about a vicious cycle of war stem from their own desperate need for Western consumer stability?
I think you are underestimating the long-term strategic shift underway.
But if the global economy fractures, who buys Chinese exports? Who fuels their manufacturing hubs? Their diplomatic posturing is a symptom of their absolute reliance on the very global order that U.S. military deterrence is currently trying to protect.
Yes, China relies heavily on energy imports, which is exactly why they brokered the diplomatic normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran prior to this escalation. Notice the difference in approach there.
Economic interdependence versus military deterrence.
Exactly. China is building a security architecture based on economic interdependence. When India has to navigate a labyrinth of complex financial waivers just to secure gas tankers, they don't look at the U.S. and see a protector. They see the primary source of global volatility.
Let's look at the reality of that alienation, though, because the financial markets tell a completely different story. During that systemic panic attack this week, where did the capital actually flow?
Into safe havens.
Right, but it didn't flow into the yuan, it didn't flow into some nascent BRICS currency. It flowed massively into U.S. treasuries. This is the dollar smile theory in action.
That just proves the inertia of the current system, not its sustainability.
It proves that global trade requires a guarantor of physical security. The Global South may resent the volatility, but they fundamentally understand that freedom of navigation is underwritten by the U.S. Navy and its allies.
It does not have to be a binary choice between U.S. military hegemony and total oceanic collapse. That is a false dichotomy.
Well, if we step back and allow hostile actors to dictate who transits global choke points based on arbitrary definitions of enemy-linked ships, the entire system of free trade collapses. The Global South would suffer far more under a pirate-ridden oceanic system.
Again, the multipolar world emerging envisions regional, collective security arrangements, not piracy. For example, France 24 noted Japan is considering sending its own minesweepers to the Strait after a ceasefire. That's a completely different model.
Proportional responsibility.
Right. Nations taking collective responsibility for their own supply lines. The danger of the current U.S.-Israel posture is that it treats every geopolitical challenge as a nail requiring a military hammer. And the shockwaves literally destroy the economic foundations of countries thousands of miles away.
But proportional responsibility only works if there is a universal consensus on the basic rules of the road. When a rogue actor rejects those rules and uses global economic strangulation as leverage, proportional responses fail. You need disproportionate deterrence.
I would argue that disproportionate deterrence is just an academic phrase for catastrophic escalation. When you threaten to obliterate a sovereign nation's vital infrastructure, you leave them with nothing to lose. That is how you inadvertently trigger the conflict you claim to be preventing.
Which really brings us to the core tension of our discussion today. As we look at the immense, interconnected complexity of this situation, my view remains that the planetary economic impacts of this standoff are severe, undeniable, and deeply painful.
Absolutely. On that we agree.
But projecting overwhelming strength and securing vital choke points like the Strait of Hormuz is the only historically proven method to bring hostile actors to the negotiating table. The global economy requires a secure physical foundation, and sometimes securing that foundation requires enduring the acute, uncomfortable friction of deterrence.
And my stance remains that the collateral damage of this brinkmanship is simply too high a price for the planet to pay. The warnings from the IEA are not theoretical models. The real-world inflation starving families in India is happening right now.
It's a heavy cost, yes.
By weaponizing global supply chains and relying on unilateral military ultimatums, this strategy is ultimately isolating the West. It is accelerating the very thing it fears most, empowering a multipolar coalition and driving the global South to build a parallel financial world order.
Well, what we can certainly agree on is the profound, fragile complexity of the global economy's reliance on just a few geographic choke points.
Without a doubt.
The events in the Middle East are no longer regional conflicts. Through the mechanisms of global finance and energy dependency, they are instantaneous planetary economic events.
Yeah, an insurance premium adjustment in London instantly dictates the price of bread in New Delhi, or the viability of a tech startup in Silicon Valley. The shifting alliances we're seeing in the global South warrant much deeper exploration.
There's a wealth of material out there for listeners who want to understand exactly how the tectonic plates of global power are realigning. We leave it to you to weigh whether the price of forced diplomacy is worth the global economic strain.
It's a heavy question.
It is. At the top of the show, we talked about the entire planetary infrastructure balancing on a tightrope.
A 21-mile-wide tightrope.
Indeed. And as the winds of geopolitics continue to howl, the question isn't just whether the tightrope will snap, it's who will be left holding the net if it does.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.